Again, it is currently August 19th, 2075 here in the Gooba universe. I wanted to bring you something a little bit different today than I have been doing so far in my first two videos. I wanted to stick to kind of just highlighting one team and then make it kind of a shorter video, and then maybe I could knock out a few of them in a row here for you guys. But I thought the first team we could start with, as you can see on my screen, is the Cincinnati Showboats. Todd's been putting out some good Gooba content recently, and I figured we'd owe him one and kind of look through his team here and kind of highlight that and see the job he's done. So, as you can see on the standings, the left Cincinnati currently sitting at 68 and 55, good for second place in the East, 11 games behind the Nashville Sounds, and then 10 games above the Toronto Beavers for third place. So Cincinnati is sitting in a good spot. The division is probably out of reach for them at this point, with a month and a half remaining. Probably not going to catch the Sounds, but pretty good. Should feel pretty good about their position for the playoffs. They should definitely make it without. We'll pull up their team info here. So they have actually played down a little bit than what you would expect. Their Pythagorean record is 72 and 51. So they're 4 games under that, but still at 13 games 500, I can think they can be happy with that. They got off to a great start to start the year in April and May. They were sitting at 37 and 20, but after that, June was just a horrible month for them. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but you only win 9 out of 27 games. Something wasn't going right there for them, but they were able to kind of turn that around and pick it up a little bit in June, and have been okay so far in August. So it seems like they've kind of got things back together, have maybe righted the ship a little bit. So I still think, come postseason, this can definitely still be a dangerous team. If we look over at their batting stats here in the middle, first thing you notice, or at least I notice, is the home runs and extra base hits, both first in the MBBA, as well as first down in base running. So it's interesting, they're not going to steal a lot of bases. They're dead last, but they do run, when they put people on, they run them well, and they're able to drive them in. So when you count that with the rest of their average and OBP here, probably in a little bit above average, if not well above average offense here. And then on the right here, their pitching stats and defensive stats. First in starters ERA, we can attribute a lot to that to one man. I think most of you know who he is. But otherwise, even the rest of their numbers here, pretty good. They're second in WAR. Bullpen ERA sitting at 3, so pretty good. They're 6th in the NBA in that ranking, but I think that's kind of attributes more to the pitching dominant season we have. Normally that would be a much better ranking sitting at 3. They do walk hitters. They're dead last in walking hitters. So you obviously don't like to see that. But on the flip side of that, they are second in home runs allowed. So, their pitchers might walk guys and get them on base, but at least they're not giving up the long ball to drive them all in, And they are also second in strikeouts. So they might get some guys on via walk, but they're not going to let them come in via the home run, and they can strike it out to end the inning. So go back to their homepage over here. Todd's been one of the more active GMs in the game, over year in the time of the Gooba. He's been gone out and made trades, been aggressive, made some big free agent sign as well. Looking right at the top of their lineup, Richard Parsons has been huge for them this season. He's been amazing. He came over from a trade from Greenville early in the year. Their 5th hitter here, Brendan Kraft, was also acquired in that same trade from Greenville earlier in the year. You can see he's completely turned around his performance with Greenville. Isaac Brusted was a guy they also added earlier in the year from Singapore. The 35-year-old isn't quite hitting as well as he was, for Singapore, but as a right-handed hitter in a very left-handed hitting heavy lineup, he's definitely an important part of this team. In the rotation in the offseason, they went out and got Papadopoulos, as well as Duplantis from Bogota. So they had two upgrades there in the rotation right away to complement three other guys that have been pretty good. Obviously they got Andre Chappell here, who's been fantastic, one of the best players in the Gooba right now. He's been the best pitcher so far over the last few seasons since they got him from Philadelphia. He's been outstanding, near 10 WAR in both of his last two seasons. He's gonna probably push the 8-9 WAR mark again. So he's just been ridiculous. Definitely the centerpiece of this team. And then after this year, his contract actually goes down to only being paid $24 million as they front-loaded that deal pretty heavily. So he'll be a steal at that rate for sure, based on what he's done. But definitely the foundational piece of this team. And then the two other youngsters they got here, and Ken McElmoy was former first overall pick, has really come on these last few seasons. He had over 4 WAR in 2074 and has lowered his ERA almost a whole run this year. So he's a pretty good second starter to have in your rotation, especially come playoff time. Lance Brooks, his ERA doesn't really show, what he's done this year. I mean, he does have well over positive WAR, so it's not like he's been really tanking on the underlying stats, but he's definitely been walking a lot more hitters than you'd like. So hopefully he'll come along, soon for them. But otherwise, rotation's been pretty good, as you can see by the numbers here. Like I mentioned, they've been the top group in the MBBA. I mentioned Chappell as kind of being the foundational piece of this team, but there's two other guys that I think are very important to the long-term success of this franchise. And one of them is this guy right here, Lalong, 24-year-old second baseman, arguably the most talented young hitter in baseball right now. I think if you're starting a franchise, this is probably the guy you're going to want to pick. I mean, you look at his ratings, they're ridiculous, especially against right-handed pitching. I mean, 19 contact, as well as 18 gap, 18 power, and 18 void K against right-handed pitching. That's ridiculous. You're not going to find any other guy in the league right now that has that kind of talent, especially not one that's 24 years old and can play several different positions. As you can see here, he can play second base pretty well. He can play left field. He can definitely probably even hit third base or right field in a pinch if need be. But second base and left field pretty well. So he's going to be really good for a long time, especially when you pair him up with some of the other stars that they have. The other guy that I want to highlight for them is in their bullpen, and Pierre Andre, 26-year-old closer, formerly one of my prospects. Actually drafted him back in the first round, but traded him later to Cincinnati. He's been fantastic over the last few years as a left-handed reliever. That splitter fastball combination is ridiculous and leads to a high amount of strikeouts. He's having his best year so far. He's got 3.1 WAR in under 60 innings so far. That's pretty crazy. He's hit 3+ WAR in each of the last 2 years. I don't really know where he sits right now, but I imagine he's, in the conversation for the Cardozo Award this year. So he's been great. And I definitely would pair him as well as Chappell and Lalong as the foundational pieces of this team moving forward. So that's kind of a nice little overview of what we got going on in Cincinnati right now. They got quite a bit of talent at every level of the team, so I think that can definitely make them dangerous in the postseason. Especially when you got a guy like Andre Chappell pitching in at least 2 starts for the series. So we'll see what happens for the rest of the season for Cincinnati, but I definitely like their chances to make the playoffs.